Good afternoon, everyone. This is Tim Marr from the Office of Real Property Tax Services. I'm here today with Chris Hayes, Michael St. Germain, Kevin Gill, Tobias Lake, and Jeff Gloak. So today we want to give you an overview of the process of how we developed this new valuation model, talk about the discount rate, the final model, answer any of your questions, and then give you a demonstration of the model. So, as you may know, you probably know by now, as part of this year's budget, there was a legislative process that the tax department is going to develop a model to use for valuing solar and wind energy systems with a nameplate capacity equal to or greater than 1 megawatt. And a 1 megawatt solar farm typically covers 5 to 10 acres, so we're not talking about solar panels on someone's house or solar panels on top of the Target store. It's a solar project that's usually at least 5 acres to get up to the 1 megawatt capacity. The law required us to use discounted cash flow approach to value these properties. In addition, it also required us to talk with the New York State Assessors Association and the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, otherwise known as NYSERDA, before we publish the model. And beginning next year with 2022 assessment rules, assessors will use the model and discount rate that's established to value and place assessments on the affected energy projects. If you have a pilot, you can continue to have pilot payments. You can still negotiate pilots. This doesn't keep you from doing that. It just says that each year going forward, the assessor will use this valuation model to determine the assessed value of the project. So the model will produce a value, multiply that by your level of assessment to get an assessed value. Okay. In addition to working with NYSERDA and the State Assessors Association, we also had input from many people, including the Alliance for Clean Energy, the State Economic Development Council, and an array of renewable energy developers. Okay. The law also required that we would have to have a comment period before we published the final model. It said we had to publish the final model within 180 days of the budget being enacted, and that we had to also allow for a 60-day comment period. So on August 2nd, we launched a new web page that had preliminary discount rates, preliminary model, and also an unlocked model with viewable formulas so that the users could look at that and see what's behind the scenes. We heard many comments after we published that model. In reaction to that, we also published a second model, an alternative model to Model 1, on September 17th, and then the comment period ended on October 1st. And we thank all the people who provided comments. We received more than 60 comments in total, reviewed all the comments, and updated the model as appropriate. And then we published the final model and discount rate that will be used for 2022 assessment rolls on October 14th. So as we go through this thing, I'm going to stop occasionally and answer some of the questions we received from our last webinar back in August. At that meeting, we had about 300 people attend, and we received more than 200 questions. We took the questions, put them into groupings, and published answers on September 24th, and then we published some updates on October 14th, and that's available on our web page. So just go through a couple of the more common questions. The first one is, will assessors use the new methodology to determine the assessment for solar and wind properties every year? Yes. The law requires the assessor to use the methodology in place for that year to come up with the value of the solar or wind project. Next common question we had was, why is the model going to be updated annually? And the answer to that is, we're going to be learning more each year about these projects. For example, right now, the model doesn't allow for the valuation of wind projects that are offshore on a lake or off in the Atlantic Ocean. There's talk of developing those types of projects, so we're going to have to come up with a revised model that includes that. There will also be changes in economic conditions. We'll learn more about how long these facilities last, how efficient they are, and those items might change over time. So we're expecting to have to change the model from one year to the next. We'll also receive more input from the Assessors Association going forward. That could lead to changes. And then obviously the discount rate will change as economic conditions change. Question we also heard is, can we take this model and use it to value other types of projects that are smaller? For example, the solar panels on top of someone's house, and the answer is no. This model is designed to be used for projects of 1 megawatt or greater. Okay. The other thing we heard from many was, why don't we just use the cost approach? We know what the cost is. That seems to be more appropriate. Why don't we use that? And the quick answer to that is the law said we had to use the discounted cash flow approach. That's what Section 575B requires. So we don't have any option there. That's what the legislature wanted us to do, and that's what we have to do. Okay. Another question, once we talked about how each year the assessor is going to use the model to place a value on the solar and wind projects, to some that didn't seem fair. We're not changing any other assessments. Why are we allowed to just change the project's assessment, and does that constitute selective or spot assessing? And the answer to that is no. The law is clear. The assessor is required to use the new methodology every year for projects that are 1 megawatt or larger. And it authorizes the department to update the model for the discount rate annually and to update the model as appropriate. Okay. Another big thing that came up was, how does the methodology impact pilots that you've already had that might be in place for 1 year or 5 years or 10 years? And the key to that is the answer depends on the terms of the existing pilot agreement. If the pilot says you're going to pay X amount of dollars this year and it goes up 2% every year, then it wouldn't be impacted by this. But if the pilot talks about it's a tax rate multiplied by an assessed value, then the pilot would be impacted by this, because theoretically the assessment that's developed next year will be different than the assessment you had on the roll for this year. Okay. We also had other questions about taxing jurisdictions that did not opt out of RP 487 exemption and enter into a pilot agreement. Are they grandfathered and the new methodology will not apply for them while the pilot's still in place? And the answer to that is the methodology will apply to all projects of 1 megawatt or larger. So next question along the same vein is, will some existing pilots need to be modified as a result of this new methodology? And that's really a local determination. If the locality thinks the pilot and the developer agree, then the pilot might be modified, but that's a local decision, not something that's included in the law. The law just basically says, here's a method for developing the assessed value of these projects each and every year. Along the same lines, the question we received was, if the locality owns the solar or wind plant, will it still be wholly exempt under the new methodology? And the quick answer is, if it's exempt under Section 406 of the real property tax law, it's continue to be exempt. The locality would still use the new model to develop the assessed value, but if it's wholly exempt, it doesn't matter. Similar to a church or a high school or a library, you place an assessment on the roll. This is just saying how you would develop the assessment. Okay. Is the exemption on the 487 for solar, wind, and other energy systems still in effect regarding of their size? And the answer is yes, it continues to be in effect, except where a locality has opted out of the exemption. And again, as becoming pretty repetitive, you'll still use the model to develop the assessed value. Does the new law eliminate the penalty for converting ag land to a solar project? And the quick answer to that again is no. Conversion law payments authorized by ag sections 305 and 306 still apply to the development of solar generating facilities. Another question that came up is, how can assessors get specific values to enter into the model from developers? And developers are aware of the new law and can be expected to provide information when needed. Assessors have the authority to contact the developer for more information, just as they do with any other property. Along those same lines, should the assessor contact the developer for updated information each year? And the quick answer there is, you may wish to contact the developer annually to be aware of any changes to the plant. Along the lines of questions you might want to ask the developer. It was suggested to us last week that maybe we should the department should work with assessors to come up with maybe a sample letter or a sample form that the assessors could use. So we're working on that right now, and we, in consultation with the assessors and county directors, we're going to try to develop a form that makes sense, that if assessors want to, they could use that to request more information from the developers on the project, what types of questions they should ask. Okay. Next topic is discount rates. And we ended up with 3 different discount rates for 3 different types of projects in our mind. And they reflect differences in investment associated with the system type and size. And these are the same discount rates that were in the original model back from early August. We didn't get any information from anyone that would cause us to change these determinations. So what we ended up with for large solar, which is greater than 5 megawatts, a discount rate of 7.16. For the smaller solars between 1 and 5 megawatts, the discount rate ends up being 8%. And then wind, which is greater than 1 megawatt to be used by this model, we ended up with a discount rate of 9.66. And how do we develop that discount rate? It's basically the weighted average cost of capital. Discount rates are based on the economic principle of weighted average cost of capital. Looking forward, it's the time value of money and investor risk. Takes into account the expected rate of return that the market participants require to attract funds to a particular investment. Discount rates that we determined are pre-tax discount rates. You'll add the local full value tax rate to come up with the final discount rate. And in the discounted cash flow model, what we're doing is we're looking out over the life of the project, and we're estimating revenue each year. We're estimating expenses each year. Expenses minus revenue become the income, and then you're discounting that back to today, adding all those values up to come up with a value. Okay. 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 So let's now talk about the appraisal model that we developed, the final model that was put out a week or so ago. The model is basically an Excel spreadsheet that's on our website that you can click on. It'll open up an Excel spreadsheet on your local computer. You have to enter a few variables, not too many, and then it'll produce a value, along with a spreadsheet that shows what our estimated expenses and revenues are over the life of the project based on the inputs that you had. So it looks like this, not that many items to fill in. The first one is the NISO zone. That's the New York Independent System Operator Zone. And they're the ones who monitor and maintain the electric grid in New York State. And New York State is broken down into 11 main zones for energy pricing. They control the electric grid. If you're unsure of the zone of properties in, you can visit their website and just give you a map, and it'll show you where the project that you have is in. Okay. The next thing is the plant type. And the plant type, there's 3 options. There's solar fixed axis. That means the solar panels are mounted on stationary racks. Second item is solar tracking, and that's they try to maintain an optimal angle of the sun throughout the day. That improves the efficiency of the solar panels, but it's higher installation costs and higher maintenance costs. And then the third item is land-based wind, which are wind turbines that capture the motion of wind to produce energy. As I said, the future is there's going to be water-based wind projects in the future. The third item that this Excel file will ask you for is a system size, and it's in kilowatts. And you enter the capacity, the nameplate capacity of the generating system, and that's the maximum power that could be generated by the system under optimal conditions. If it's a solar project, it's kilowatts alternating current, and if it's wind, it's kilowatts, and that should be available from the plant owner. That's something that should be readily available, publicly available, and shouldn't be that difficult to get. The next item, fourth item you need to enter, is the date of operation, and that's the date the plant began operating, or if the plant's not yet operating, the date that construction was completed. Fifth item is the taxable status date for your assessing unit. And then we use that data to fill the system age at taxable status date. Next item, discount rate will be pre-filled based on the type of project, either small solar, large solar, or land-based wind. And then to that, we're going to have to add the tax load. Okay, so you'll compute the tax load outside of the Excel spreadsheet and then enter that into this. And that's one of the questions we had last month when we did the webinar. One of the data inputs is tax load. Where do I find the tax load for a project? And that's something the assessor needs to calculate, and it's something I'm assuming most of the assessors on the line have already done this and are familiar with what their tax rate in their locality is. And it should reflect all property taxes applicable to the property, including town, county, village, school district, and special tax rates, special district tax rates rather. And basically, just as a refresher, step one for each taxing jurisdiction, multiply the tax rate per thousand by the EQ rate. Step two, divide the product by 1,000. And then step three, sum the results for all jurisdictions. So let's say, you're in a town where your equalization rate is 50 and your tax rate, overall total assessed value tax rate is 40. You multiply the $40 per thousand assessed value tax rate by the 50 to get 2,000, divide that by 1,000 to get 2. So that'd be a case where the full value tax load for this project would be 2%. So you'd add that to the pre-tax discount rate to get the total. So in this case, we had 8%. You add in 2.5. In this case, on the screen, you added in 2.5% because that's what the result was. They get a loaded tax discount rate of 10.5%. Okay. The next item is something that's new since we presented Model 1 back in August. There were some questions about the land values and should we or shouldn't we be including the land value under the project. So we ended up saying, no, let's get the, sounds like most cases the assessor is aware that the property's being leased, and you would then in that case add the annual ground lease payment, enter that into the model. In many cases, we've heard that there's an escalator that goes up maybe 1.5% or 2% a year. You can enter that number. If it's not increasing over time and it's just a fixed annual payment, then you would put 0 there. Okay, so next question we heard often was, how does the model handle the value of the land? And how should we value the land if it's leased or very large? Okay. So as we just showed, the user has the opportunity to enter the lease amount. If you enter a lease amount, then the model does not include the land value. The assessor should use typical standard appraisal methodologies to value the land. So if you have a lease payment, you enter that into the model, therefore that will not be included in our value. The value would just be the project without land, and then the assessor would just add in the value of the land to get to the total value of the parcel. If the property is not leased, then you would not enter any data into that field. In that case, we would be estimating the value of the land would be included in our estimated value of the total project, and it would include the land underneath the solar panels or whatever's needed for the wind project. Next question. Solar company owns the parcel the solar farm is located on, therefore there is no lease payment. And therefore, the model will include the value of the land. But how does the assessor break that down between, the question is how do they break it down between improvement and land? In that case, we know the total value of the parcel. The assessor would just use typical methodology to value the land and put that as the land value on the roll, and the difference between total and land would be what the project is worth without the land. Size-dependent user inputs. If you have more than 5,000 kilowatt, often called Tier 1, do not require any additional user inputs. For solar plants of less than 5,000 kilowatts, sometimes referred to as value of distributed energy resources, or VDER, you have to enter some additional information that the plant owner should be able to provide to you. In that case, the first thing we need to know is what's the utility company, and there's 7 choices. You would just click on the one that is in your locality. The next item is demand reduction value, and this is the amount that a project reduces the utility's future needs to make grid upgrades. This field is auto-filled based on the utility company selected. For the 7 companies, we're aware of the values, so that's already pre-filled. The next item, a user input, is the VETR credits, and that's either the community or the market transition credit. It's either one or the other. It can't have both. The community credit is available on a limited basis in order to encourage development of community distributed generation projects. In other cases, the community credit is available, and it's similar in structure, and the developer should have that information for you. Okay, so once you enter that information, there'll be a second tab on the Excel spreadsheet that's labeled Model, and that'll give you a breakdown of the estimated income and expenses over the life of the project. As I was talking about before, the discounted cash flow approach is basically estimating expenses, revenues each year going forward, and then discounting them back to today. That'll all be on the second tab. And then once you have the full value from the second tab, it has to be at the same, that property should be the same level as other properties, so you'd multiply that value by your level of assessment. Okay. There are a few more questions that I just want to go over before we get to any questions in this section. The first was, why was 25 years selected as the discount period? And the answer is that's what the typical warranty period is for a renewable energy project, is 25 years. And that's something, again, that could change over time. Maybe, you know, years down the road, they might last 30 or 40 or 50 years or who knows what, and we might have to change the model. Okay. With that, I'm going to take a second to look at some of the questions folks have typed in to see if one of the folks in the room or I can answer your questions before we get into the demo. So thanks for your questions. We're going to go through some of them. The first one is, what if the developer refuses to provide you with information? Can I use a different method? Can I go and use the cost method, for example? The answer to that is no. You have to use this model to develop the assessed value of the project. If the developer refuses to provide you with some information, you should either use your best judgment, or you could also contact us here at the tax department. Maybe we can help you get that information, or maybe we can provide you with some estimates that you could use in those cases. But you have to use this model. That's what the law says. You can't go off and say, well, I'm going to use the cost, or I'm going to use a different approach to value than what's in the model. Next question is, we have to put these values on the roll each year. Is that going to impact the calculation of the equalization rate? The quick answer is no, because you're putting these on at the same level of assessment as all other properties, so it should have no impact. For example, if you know, through the PDC process, you know, we're in agreement that 50% seems reasonable, and that's your LOA, you would just multiply the total value of the project by 50%, and it should not change your equalization rate. So that's not an issue in this case. So we have a couple of questions around the idea that maybe it's not as simple as the model shows around tax rates. So let's see, first of all, let's say the project is in 2 towns. How would I come up with the value? I think in that case, you'd come up with the total value and then apportion it to each of the towns based on the percentage of the project in each town. Another item is, how would I come up with the tax rate if part of the project's in school district A and part is in school district B? In that case, for the tax rate, I would just weight it by the percent that's in each school district. So if 2/3 of the properties in school district A and 1/3 in project B, I just weight the tax rates for each school district A and B by those percentages, and they come up with the overall tax rate. Another item is, what if a project's in a town and a village, and they have different levels of assessment? What should I do? In that case, the town assessment roll would reflect the level of assessment on the town roll, and the village assessment would reflect the village level of assessment. So in that case, just like many other properties, they might get 2 different assessments, one for town purposes and one for the village assessment roll. A question about, what if they started building a project and it's not complete by taxable status date? Would you use this model? And the quick answer is no, because this model is based on production, and if you're not producing, then you would not be using this model to value the property. So we had some questions about, I know the developer's leasing the land, but he refuses to share the information with me. In that case, I would just put 0 in as the lease payment. In that case, the value of the model produces is for the land and the project. A question about what dollar per acre we're using to value land, and that's not how our model's doing that. Our model's not saying X dollars per acre. It's basically if you plug in a annual lease amount, it's converting that into the value of the land. So it's not looking at whether it's 1 acre, 2 acres, 3 acres, or multiplying it by X thousands of dollars. We had another question about the tax load. And again, step 1, you take the assessed value tax rate and multiply that by your current year equalization rate / level of assessment to get the full value tax rate for each taxing purpose. Thanks for all these great questions. I hope this is helpful for the others on the line. And as you might have heard, Jeff Glock is here. Jeff will update the frequently asked questions with some of the questions we've had today to make it easier for you in the future to refer back to our webpage to find the answers to things you may have. And even after this meeting, feel free to send us questions and we'll add them to our website as appropriate. A question about do the community and market credits change from year to year, and the answer as of right now is no, they don't change. They're good each year for the life of the project. A question about, I feel sorry for this assessor. The project's 20 parcels and it goes into 3 different school districts. What full value tax rates should they use? And he suggests using a weighted average of the 3, and that seems reasonable to me. And then the next part of the question would be, would you come up with the value for the total project? How do you divide it over the 20 parcels with different owners? I would say, again, apportion it based on how much of the project is in each of those, on each of those parcels. A question about where can you find the model? It's right on our website. If you go to our tax.gov.com,
tax.ny.gov and search solar, it'll bring you right to the webpage.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. Just type solar and it'll come right to the webpage, and on that webpage we'll have instructions, some frequently asked questions, where the model can be located, and also a place where you can send in questions to. And we're here to help you on this one for sure. I know this is new for all the assessors this year. So someone typed in they'd like to see a demo of this model, so we'll give you a demonstration of that. So we're going to change our screen to go to our website, open up the model. In the meantime, feel free to continue asking any questions you might have, and we'll try to get to them after we do the demo. And again, thanks for taking your time out of your busy day to be with us. We have about 240 local officials on the line, so it just shows you the interest in this new model. Okay, so hopefully you can all see, if you go to our home page and you type in solar valuation, scroll down, it'll be model. You click on that, it'll open up this Excel spreadsheet, and it'll ask you for these handful of variables that we've discussed already. So for in this case, the first question is the NISO zone. So let's for fun, let's say, well, it's not the central, it's the capital region. And let's say, yeah, it is a solar fixed axis plant, but let's say it's 20 megawatts, which is 20,000 kilowatts. Let's say it's brand new. Let's say I go, so that means the before tax discount rate for this type of project is 7.16. I add in a tax load, let's say it's somewhere in Saratoga County, so the tax rate, so let's say 2.2. For simplicity's sake, in this case, we'll say, when they say sorry. Okay. When I added 2.2, it added that to the 7.16 and computed 9.36 as the loaded discount rate. It then asks if we know the annual ground lease. Let's say in this case I don't have that information available to me. That's all the information I need to give because this is what's called the Tier 1 solar project. If I come down to the bottom left here, hand side here, and click on model, it'll give me, as you see, it goes across to the right-hand side for each year. Into the future, into year 25, it'll give you a production amount, an energy revenue, a capacity revenue, a total revenue. Down below, it'll compute total income each year, and then it'll give you expenses. At the very bottom, it'll say, what's the value of these cash flows over the next 25 years? In this case, $7,891,345. And in this case, since we did not enter a lease amount, this is the value of all the improvements, the solar project, along with the land necessary for the plant operation. Okay, in this case, if that was the whole parcel, you would multiply that by your local level of assessment to get an assessed value, and you'd be all set. Let's say if we were to go back and say, just for example, the lease is $20,000 a year. You come back down here to the model and it would change the value. In this case, the value is $7.667 million, and that's value for improvements only, and you would have to add in back in the land value to get the total value of the parcel. If it's a smaller wind project, smaller solar project, let's say it's 2,000 kilowatts, converts into 2 megawatts. Let's say you don't know the land value. It's going to come down and ask you, in this case, so then in this case, since it's not more than 5,000 kilowatts, it asks me some more questions. So the first is, which of the utility companies am I associated with? So let's say in this case it's the part of the county where NYSEG's involved. It defaults, it gives you a DRV rate, and then it asks you if you know the community or market transition credit or the community adder. Let's just say in this case it's community adder of 800,000?
200,000?
Let's say 500,000. They'll come back here and give you a value of, it gives you the revenues and expenses, an estimate of the value of $782,000. That's the improvements in the land for the plant operations. So that's a quick demo of how relatively easy it is to use the model. Just a few variables you need to enter, a few pieces of information you might need from the developer. You need to compute the full value tax rate, know what zone it's in, know the plant type. If you have lease information, enter that. The plant size, plug all that information in, you get a model value, multiply that by your level of assessment, and you'd have an assessed value. So I'll open up to any questions about what we just did, or any questions from earlier in the presentation that the group here will try to answer for you. So a couple of questions about the exemption that lasts 15 years. What happens after the 15 years? As of right now, after 15 years, it's fully taxable. Question about what we'll be sharing with you after this meeting. Will we be sharing the PowerPoint presentation? The answer is yes. In addition, this presentation is being recorded, so that'll be shared with you also. I'm going to turn this one over to Michael St. Germain, one of our longtime appraisers. The question about, if you don't enter a lease value, how can you come up with the value? How can your value be correct? You don't enter any acres. Don't you need to know the acres to come up with the value? Mike, do you have an answer to that?
It's basically just use the income approach is applying this value. So if you're putting in a lease, it's backing out that expense. It's taking out the value of the land. When there's a zero lease expense, the income is that much larger, so it's valuing everything necessary, the improvements and the land supporting that improvement. So it doesn't directly correlate to how much land is under it. It's tied solely to the income.
Question about what about the excess land, Mike?
And it just, that kind of ties in too. It's, the model is not, with a zero lease, the model is not valuing excess land. Whether, you know, if the if the project covers 10 acres out of 50, then no, it's not creating a value for that other 40. What it's doing with no land lease is estimating the value of the improvements and the land that support those improvements. So if you have excess land, if you have any kind of special cases, you'll just need to use some other standard appraisal methodology to value either that excess land or the entire land parcel.
Thank you, Mike. A question about how will this impact the equalization rate? Since this property is going to be at the same level of assessment as all other property, just by definition of how you're coming up with the value, it should have no impact on equalization rates, whether it's included in our sample for the survey or not, because basically by definition you're taking the value that we agree with you on, that we developed a model for, multiplying it by the level of assessment, so it's not going to have impact on the equalization rate. A question about, you know, should the assessor round the final number and what should they round it to? We would say just use it as it comes up. Multiply the model value times the level of assessment to get the assessed value for that year, and it is what it is. Question about what's the community credit, and that's a NYSERDA credit that they provide to certain developers. And again, the developer will know that number and should share it with the assessor when asked for it. Question is, the assessor uses the model, can the taxpayer still file a grievance with the Board of Assessment Review? And the answer is the taxpayer can always file a grievance. Of course, we would anticipate the Board of Review would dismiss it based on the fact that the assessor did everything right, and you don't have the ability to do something different than the model.
All right, cool.
Another question about the two different credits and what are they, and they're just basically direct payments to the developer for developing the project, an incentive for them to do that. Question about the sample letter that you could send to the developer, when will that be ready? There's a meeting of RIPTAC this Thursday, and we plan to discuss it with RIPTAC on this Thursday's meeting, and hopefully we'll be closer to knowing when they'll be available. We want something that makes sense to us and to the developer and to the assessor, so we want input from RIPTAC, and we'll be doing that this Thursday, and we'll have more information to share after that meeting. Thank you again. A couple of questions about, you know, if I have multiple plants in my town, one is if I have 3 separate plants and they're on separate parcels, should I value them as one or should I value them as 3 separate plants? If they're 3 separate plants, you should value each one independently. If it's one plant on a multiple parcels, then I would just value the one parcel and apportion the value to the various parcels. So again, each project should be valued independently, but if it's a project that's on multiple parcels, just value it once and apportion it among the parcels. A question about are federal tax credits included in this model, and the answer to that is no, they are not. A question about, there's a spot on the state website that has information on Tier 1 projects. We should talk about that. And most of that information is extraneous to this model. We don't really need too much information, but we will update our procedures just to let you know that if you want to see more information, you can, and we'll update our website for that. Thanks for that suggestion. A question about what's the best time to place a value on these projects. Should I wait until after taxable status date? At this point, I would think, since in most cases we don't expect anything to change, I would say if you want to go get information over the next couple of months, feel fine to do it and plug it into the model. I mean, we don't anticipate more the capacity to change or anything like that, so I would say there's no need to wait until March 1st to do this.
Brian went on to explain that he's asking that question in terms of, are we going to update the model again in the spring?
Okay, that's a good question. This is the model for 2022 assessment rolls. The next time this model or discount rate might change would be for 2023 assessment rolls. So again, next summer, there'll be a comment period on the discount rate and possibly the model, and then we'll publish a new final model with discount rates next fall, and it'll be an annual cycle from now on. So there should not be any changes between now and your tentative roll. Okay. So we've gone 1 hour. Thank you very much for participating. Thanks for all your great questions. There might be a couple of questions we didn't didn't see or didn't get to answer, but we'll review them after this meeting and make sure we get back to you, and we're going to be adding some of the questions and answers to our website. The presentation, along with a copy of this webinar, will be available on our website soon. And again, you have any comments, feel free to send it to our email address there. And thank you on behalf of everyone at the tax department. Have a great day. We'll see some of you at RIPTAC this Thursday. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate all your help.